to Overcomers, God Makes the Difference, where ordinary people are doing extraordinary things through the power of Jesus Christ. I'm your host, Sherri Wargin, and today joining me is a very special guest, one of my good friends for over 13 years, Rose Spizman. Rose, thank you for being on our show.
Thank you for having me, Sherri.
And Rose and I first got to know each other going on a mission trip together to Australia in 2001. Rose and her husband, Howard, decided it was time to step into a mission trip together. Their destination was Haiti, and what they didn't know was that they were going to be part of one of the world's worst ever natural disasters, one of the biggest earthquakes ever in the world, which happened in Haiti, a 7.0 earthquake. And during that earthquake, there was between 230,000 to 300,000 lives that were lost, and over 1.5 million people were left homeless. So, Rose, before you had gone to Haiti on that mission trip, how many international mission trips had you been on up to that point?
I'd only been on 2.
What kind of was prompting you to go to Haiti?
Well, I was feeling kind of stuck, and I know God had given me many things and put lots of things in me over several years, and I just thought we needed to get together and do something and use what He's given us.
And God was just kind of leading you in a new direction, kind of an adventure in Him, and you were stepping out, and this was your first mission trip with your husband, the two of you together.
Right.
So we're in February 2014, and the earthquake happened about 4 years ago, January 2010. So I want you to tell us the story of what happened when you were in Haiti during one of the worst earthquakes ever. Talk about your team, how many people, what were your objectives, your purpose in going on the mission trip.
Well, there were 6 of us on the team, and there was a pastors' conference that we were going to be a support team for. We were also going to go to the orphanage. We were going to do some painting and some physical labor.
And then in some of the churches that you went to, did you kind of share a little message or a testimony, a couple of you?
We all got the opportunity to share something that was on our heart, and for me it was the first time that I had done any speaking publicly.
Public speaking. That's great that you stepped out and you did that. On the 5th day of your trip, you were in a home church ministering. One of the native pastors was the pastor of that home church. You were sitting at the back of the church, and tell us what happened.
All of a sudden, the building started to shake. It was similar to like when a semi goes by on a country road, on a side road, and the windows started rattling, and there was a loud rumbling. But then it got louder, and it became deafening, and everything was shaking. And it was then that I realized it was an earthquake.
Had you ever been in an earthquake before?
No, not at all. Never.
So what started to happen with the people in the home church and outside?
Well, the first thing that I remember is 2 of the men just jumped out of their chairs, flipped them over, and ran out the door. I recalled from reading that when an earthquake hits, you should get in a door frame and brace yourself. So I started to do that, and then I realized I was closest to the door and that I would be trampled if I stood in the doorway. So I knew I had to get out of the building. And as I was heading out of the building, I felt hands on my back, and I was shoved down to the ground.
So you fell on the ground, and people were still running out into the street, out of the home church. As you're laying on the floor, what went through your mind?
I thought I was going to be trampled, so I rolled out of the way, and I saw out of the corner of my eye there was a table, and my next thing to do was to crawl under the table. So as I was making my way toward the table, everything was rocking and shaking so hard like a ship that was pitching that as I made my way toward the table started sliding across the room the opposite direction. And then I tried to crawl the other way, and the table went the other direction, so I never reached the table.
So it was like you were going one direction, and then the objects and the furniture were moving around so much you couldn't get to where you wanted to go.
Yeah.
You rolled out of the way to avoid being trampled. And then once you were up and you went outside, tell us what you saw outside?
Well, the first thing I did is I just raised my arms and I said, "Thank you, Jesus." I said it over and over because I just realized that we had come through it. And then as I looked around, there were people running in every direction. And there was screaming and yelling. And across the street, there was still buildings collapsing and just shaking down.
So like they were still being demolished, like they were not finished collapsing to the ground, and so it still was the devastation and the rubble, the debris was still happening around you, and people running in the streets.
Yes, everywhere.
Were there bodies laying on the ground?
Well, at that time, I didn't know they were bodies. I just thought that people were injured and they were carrying them, but they were so limp. In hindsight, I look back and I realized that some of the people that they were carrying had probably already died.
Wow. Your team, though, were they all accounted for and safe?
Yes. There was one of the team members was back at the guest house, and we didn't know that she was all right until we got back to the guest house.
Any injuries of anybody?
Amanda had broken her arm in the fall, but other than that, we were unhurt.
And I think you shared with me something about when you got outside, you realized you didn't have your shoes on.
Yes, I couldn't believe I didn't have my shoes on. And when I looked at my feet, I didn't have any polish left on my toes. And it must have been from skidding across the floor.
And you didn't even realize all that had happened until later. It came back to you. Your team was accounted for. Maybe a minor injury of one of the team members' wrist. That's amazing. That's a miracle, isn't it?
It sure is. When we look back and see all the devastation and everything that happened and all the lives that were lost, that's a miracle.
I think that you shared with me earlier that the guest house owner took you guys back to the guest house, that you had the wherewithal to just go on Facebook and write. What did you write?
Oh, actually, it was in the van. As soon as I got in the van to go back, I just went on Facebook and put, "We are okay."
That's amazing that you just had that wherewithal just to let everybody know, because all of us that were back in the United States were wondering and were apprehensive. What happened? Are they okay? And so it was really a relief to us, those of us back here that were praying for you, that you were going to be safe and protected, that you did give us that message and get on Facebook. What a wonderful thing Facebook turned out to be for that experience. We're going to be right back with more from Rose Spizman. We're back with Rose Spizman, and Rose has been sharing about her traumatic experience that happened in January of 2010 when she and her husband were on a mission trip in Haiti. And that happened to be right when the biggest earthquake ever in the world hit. And Rose has been sharing her experience. And so she just had shared when the earthquake hit and that she could have been trampled to death, but God gave her the wisdom to roll out of the way. And amazingly, miraculously, all the team members were safe and protected. So, Rose, you were in the van and you put a note on Facebook to everyone back here in the States, we're okay. You got back to the guest house, and what did you see at the guest house? What kind of damage was there?
Well, there was furniture flipped over. There was a TV that had smashed on the floor. There was water that I don't know where it came from, but the floor in our room was flooded. And I noticed there was big cracks in the adjacent building, which is still part of the property, but there was cracks in the walls that you could have stuck your arm through. They were so big.
Wow. But you were still able to stay in that building.
Yes, it was stable.
It was stable. But the food supply that was there was no longer available, correct?
We didn't actually find that out till the next day.
The guest house owner did take care of you guys and made you dinner so that you did have sustenance. Even
after their kitchen was just destroyed, they put things together and took the responsibility of caring for us seriously and made a nice dinner for us.
You know, there was not only the big earthquake of the magnitude of 7 on the Richter scale, but then there was aftershocks. So how long did you feel the aftershocks and what were they like?
Well, the aftershocks continued on even up until when we left Haiti. They were powerful, and it was a little unnerving because we never knew if it was going to create more damage. So every time the aftershocks happened, we stayed out in the courtyard to avoid any buildings falling on us.
Like, wasn't there a big aftershock almost as big as the original earthquake?
There was. I had decided that I was going to bed. I was so exhausted, and the aftershocks had unnerved me a little bit, and I just decided I'm not going to sleep out in the courtyard. I'm going to bed, and I decided if I die, I die. But I was going to try to get some sleep, and then I must have fallen asleep for a while, and about midnight, there was an aftershock that we found out later registered 6 point something.
That's big in and of itself. So your mission trip, after about 5 days, and originally your plan was to be there how many days?
I think it was 8 days.
So it was cut short, and now you were kind of in a state of survival. How hard was it for you to not let like fear and hopelessness kind of not take over your mentality and your thoughts?
Well, it was a concentrated thing. We spent a lot of time in prayer and just looking to God for answers and just to give us strength. We meditated a lot on Psalm 91.
For God's protection and the angels to take charge over you. And so your main communication really with the outside world and the people back home in the States was?
Well, we did some texting, and then we lost texting for a day. And so there was no communication whatsoever. And I think that was probably the most difficult part for me, is not having any connection to the outside world. So we didn't know what was happening outside the guest house. We didn't know how we were going to get out. We didn't know anything.
I remember you sharing with me before, too, that you said some of the texts that you received from the people in the States, you went to bed meditating and just putting those messages in your heart because they encouraged you and they ministered to you to have a peace and a comfort that everything would be okay.
Yes.
I know you shared that you took turns as a team having devotions. And so after this happened, you were one of the people who was going to be leading devotions. And instead of just flipping through the scriptures or giving random words, you said, I'm going to wait on the Lord before I share something. And then God gave you a word that was so uplifting and encouraging. And Rose, I think you still have that word. Would you share that word that God gave you while you're in this time of turmoil and crisis?
As I was listening, this is what I wrote. I have kept you and prepared you for this time. Be strong and be of good courage. I will not leave you or forsake you. I have you in the palm of my hand. I have placed you in this place. Watch and see what I will do. I will bring deliverance. I will stretch forth my hand. You will know that I have spoken and have moved on your behalf. Wondrous works will I perform.
Wow. That's a now word from the Lord when you were in this kind of a critical situation. And God said, I've got you in the palm of my hands. And he says, I will bring deliverance. Thus saith the Lord. How comforting and strengthening is that when you're in that kind of a difficult situation? Then after the earthquake, then you kind of had 2 days where you were maybe wondering, what do we do? How do we get out of here? And wandering and not knowing what to do. And then one of the Christian leaders directed you to find the U.S. Embassy for help. You were in the van on the way to the embassy, and tell us what picture you were seeing around you as you were driving to the embassy.
There was almost like a mass exodus. People were piled into vehicles with what few belongings they could gather up. And it was bumper to bumper traffic. Some of the trucks and vehicles the tires were almost flat from the burden of the weight of all the people that were piling into all these vehicles.
And it's like they were panicking and they had to get out of Port-au-Prince. They had to get out of the city, and who knows where they were going.
Yeah, I have no idea, but it just looked like, all I can say is a mass exodus.
And so then you got to the U.S. Embassy, and then you were to check in with a U.S. Embassy person and put your name on some kind of a waiting list.
At that time, we found out that there were approximately 400 to 500 people waiting ahead of us. So our name went on a waiting list, and they told us to make our way outside and find a place on the grass because that would be our home for the next few days.
To just camp out on the grass. You
Yes.
just laid down like your clothes, and that was kind of your blanket, and you were just camping out, waiting, hoping and praying that God would make a way for you to be rescued.
Yes.
And get out of the country. You were on a waiting list, and if I recall, there was a waiting list 1, 2, and 3, and originally you were on 3, but then somehow you got moved to 2 because 1 was the one that was probably going to leave the soonest. So you were bumped up to waiting list 2, and maybe there'd be 100 or so people on each flight, and you've got maybe 500 people camped out on the U.S. Embassy lawn waiting to get out of the country. Well, something else miraculous happened. A lady walked up to you that you had never met before and said something to you. And we're going to be right back, so you stay tuned to hear what happened at the U.S. Embassy. We're back with more from Rose Spizman, who's been sharing about her harrowing time in Haiti. And Rose was sharing with us that they were directed to find the U.S. Embassy after a few days of not knowing what to do. They went to the U.S. Embassy, they signed up on lists, and there seemed to be about 500 people that were all camped out on the lawn just waiting to see if they could be rescued and could be flown out of the country. So, Rose, something miraculous happened. A lady that you had never met approached you, and she said something that forever changed your lives. What did she say?
Well, she came in real close and she whispered, I can get you out of here and I can get you out of here now, but you have to leave everything behind and you need to hurry. And so at that point, I let her know that there were still 5 of us in the group and could we all go? And she said, yes, but you need to hurry.
So you told the team what the woman had told you, and then what did you do to get ready?
Well, we just headed for the embassy building and went through a hallway and then went outside, and there were vans outside waiting for us.
So basically, you had to leave everything behind, and all you had with you that you could take was the clothes on your back, your cell phones and purses, and you had to leave all your suitcases and everything else behind.
Yes.
So you got in the vans, and then you got to where the military cargo plane was. Tell me about your reaction when you got to the door of the military cargo plane.
Well, the vans drove us right across the tarmac, and we went right up to the back end of the C-17 plane, and there was a ramp that we walked up. And as I was walking up the ramp, there were 2 military personnel that were standing there, and when I got to the top, they said, welcome aboard. And at that point, everything let loose. I cried and just felt relieved that we were on our way.
It's kind of like all the emotion and the drama that had been pent up. It's just like you could release it like, oh, thank God, it's finally going to happen.
That's exactly right.
And you really just broke down and sobbed.
Yeah.
So talk about a little bit about the inside of the plane, kind of what it looked like, because it was usually a cargo plane.
It was huge. I'd never seen a plane quite like that. And they had attached seats, like jump seats, along both walls of the plane. And then they put in 2 rows of seats back to back down the center of the plane. I counted, and it was close to 100 people, if I recall, that were on that plane.
And you were strapped in with your seat belts.
Well, we got up in the air, and they came on and said, we don't have our orders yet. We don't know where we're taking you, but when we do, we'll let you know. And a little while later into the flight, they let us know that we were going to an Air Force base in New Jersey.
And that was about how many hours away?
It was about 4 hours.
It wasn't the most comfortable flight, and it was cold, and you weren't prepared because you didn't have the clothing to be in a cold cargo jet because you're way up in the high elevation where it's cold air. But you were being rescued, so I bet you had mixed feelings at that point.
I did. There were a couple times when I thought, now I'm going to die of the cold. And I didn't know like how long it was. I didn't know how long of a flight it was. I just wanted some relief.
So you shared with me that recently you went online and you were reading about some of the flights that had left Haiti after the earthquake. What did you discover about your flight?
I discovered that we were on the first flight out of there, other than the medic flights that were taking injured people out of there. I had thought that we were probably the first flight, but it wasn't confirmed. When we got to the Air Force Base in New Jersey, it seemed at that point that I realized that we were actually the first plane that had come in.
That's amazing, too. A lady that you didn't even know said, I can get you out of here if you leave now, but you have to hurry. Could have been an angel. And then come to find out now, all these years later, that you were on the very first flight out. Isn't that amazing how God's hand was on all of you and protecting you?
It sure was, and that's where the word that he gave me made even more sense and meant so much more to me after I looked back and saw every area that he covered everything he said he would.
So, Rose, tell us how that event, how that affected your life, good or bad.
Well, it grounded me in the Lord. My faith was stretched. God came through for me. So now it's strengthened me in him, and I trust him with my life. I don't think there's anything that I will hold back from him at this point.
So I know that you went through a debriefing, and a counselor kind of facilitated a meeting with your team, and he kind of directed you, don't watch any news coverage at this point. But you were all able to kind of share things which kind of were like pieces to the puzzle. Some people saw this and some people saw that, and together it kind of made the whole picture complete. So, Rose, I love it that you said that the Haiti experience, it did change your life for the good. It was not a fun experience. It was a horrible, traumatic experience. But you felt that you were more rooted and grounded in the Lord. Your confidence has grown. The earthquake kind of shook everything maybe that needed to be shaken. And, it reminds me of in Luke how it says, and then Jesus said to them, nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be great earthquakes in various places and famines and pestilences, and there will be fearful sights and great signs from heaven. And anyone who is watching the signs of the times knows that we are living in the end times, and there is more tribulation that's coming. Rose, what would you tell people that they could believe about God when they go through difficult times like that?
Well, he's proven that he's our refuge, he's our strength, he's our help in trouble. Even though the earth be removed, he's a faithful God. The scripture that comes to mind is Psalm 46:10, be still and know that I am God. I suggest that every listener get into the Word, memorize, study, because when something traumatic happens, that's where you need to go. And the Holy Spirit will bring those things that you've hidden in your heart up, and that's what will sustain you.
And that's the strength that you can stand on. You can stand on the Word of God and know that that truth will sustain you. And know that our God is faithful to bring you through whatever situation you may face. So, Rose, did God ever change during this catastrophic event?
No.
Did he ever leave or forsake you?
No.
Not ever, and he was faithful to bring you through.
Yes, he was.
Thank you so much for sharing this inspiring story and this testimony about God's goodness and his faithfulness to watch over you guys and protect you. Thanks for coming on the show, Rose.
Thanks, Sherri, for having me.